Before we start the video, just a quick heads up. This is part 4 in a series I'm doing covering the Super Monkey Ball franchise. It's not required, but I recommend checking out the previous chapters for additional context. With that being said though, hey there, I'm Kardino, and welcome back to Fallout, a Super Monkey Ball retrospective. At this point in time, the Super Monkey Ball series was doing pretty well. We had the original 2 games on the GameCube and a port of 1 on the GBA, albeit one held back by its hardware. So when E3 2003 came around, it wasn't too surprising when rumors started circulating that AV was back at it again. After finishing F-Zero GX for Nintendo, development had started on a third mainline game subtitled Banana Crazy. It even featured LAN play, allowing up to 8 people to play together. Unfortunately, it was not meant to be. Around this time, Sega began consolidating its different studios in order to better manage its finances. And although AV made it past round 1 in 2003, they were later dissolved in 2004 to join the new Entertainment R&D department. And this meant that if they were working on a Super Monkey Ball 3, the project was cancelled. Perhaps what's most confusing about this is that IGN later interviewed Toshihiro Nagoshi where they asked the following, quote, "A long time ago, a Japanese magazine printed that Super Monkey Ball 3 was in development for GameCube and would enable up to 8 players through LAN. Was this true, and if so, what happened to the title?" To which he responded, quote, "It's just a rumor. I wonder when a long time ago is." Now, most people took this to mean that the entire thing was just speculation, but after a little research, I'm not so sure. Looking on the official site for the US Patent and Trademark Office, yeah, I'm one of those guys, we can actually see that Amusement Vision made an official filing for a game called Super Monkey Ball Banana Crazy in June of 2002, and officially published it in July of the following year. And you know what else happened that month? The release of a game called F-Zero GX. And one last thing, the trademark was abandoned in October of 2004, only a few months after AV was dissolved. Coincidence? I think not. Anyway, after the restructuring was finished, it meant that Sega themselves were in charge of any future Monkey Ball games. And in March of 2005, they released the next entry in the series, Super Monkey Ball Deluxe, for the PS2 and Xbox. That's right, the series was going multi-platform. Now, Deluxe is a strange game because it's like an enhanced port, but there are so many differences that one could also consider it a new entry. To start off, it's a compilation of all the stages from 1 and pretty much all the stages from 2, minus the rotating GameCube, which has been replaced by a die. And if all that wasn't enough, there are several new stages added too. Wait a second, a handful of new stages? Yeah, although this isn't official, it is my belief that Banana Crazy was in development, but then was cancelled in 2004, and the new stages they made were thrown in Deluxe. Nevertheless, there's no denying that this is one heck of a package. 115 stages from SMB 1, 149 from SMB 2, and 46 new stages for a grand total of 310. And of course, all the minigames make a return too. Now, one thing that's obvious right off the bat is that this is clearly built off of SMB 2. The UI, menus, and framework are pretty much all the same. It's only when you get into the details where the differences start to show. I mean, look, all the dual branding is removed from the fruit. Not in my Monkey Ball! Of course, the first mode to look at is the story. It's no surprise that the cutscenes are identical, and the only real difference is the progression. In the original, each world had 10 stages, and you need to complete all of them to continue. This time though, each world has 20 to choose from, and you only need to finish 10. Of course, all the originals return, and the new options are a combination of stages from 1 and some new exclusives. And I actually think this change is for the better. Since this is meant for more casual play, it's nice that those mandatory difficulty spikes from 2 are optional. So for those of you who thought Arthropod was too hard, there's several alternatives to choose from. And gameplay-wise, that's about it for story mode differences, so let's move on to challenge mode. Like before, you have your 3 standard difficulties, along with their respective extras. But since challenge mode is rocking 300 stages this time, these modes are much beefier. While the previous games had beginner levels that were 10 levels long, Deluxe bumps that number up to 40. Advanced has 70 floors instead of 30, and Expert has a whopping 100 floors, doubling the number of the original. Not to mention, each extra difficulty has 20 floors now. And like in 1 and 2, finishing the Expert Extra stages without a continue will unlock the Master difficulty. 20 floors of insanity, with the 10 extras from 2 returning as well. If you thought 2's stage count was impressive, I think the best way to sum it up is this. In 2, running Expert through Master Extra was a total of 80 stages. In Deluxe, that same run is now 150. Now, as for the new stages, the vast majority of them are in Beginner and Advanced, and they're extras, with only one appearing in Expert and Master respectively. As for their designs, they work fine. Only a few really stood out to me, and there were only 2 I really disliked, both appearing in the Advanced Extra level: Chaos and Dodge Maze. Now, of course, each game has had its stinkers, but there was 1 and 2 that I haven't mentioned until now: Labyrinth. It was exactly what it sounds like, a giant maze that you needed to navigate. Now, I'm of the opinion that maze levels in general are signs of lazy stage design. They don't require much skill, but the challenge is artificially heightened by you not knowing where you need to go. The only reason I sort of gave Labyrinth a pass in 2 was because it was exclusive to story mode, where you had unlimited lives. But here, the new levels don't have that excuse, and they're both in the same set of levels too. Yeah, why don't you navigate these 2 mazes with limited time and no clue where to go? That's just great game design. I'm really not sure whether these or Switch Inferno are worse. But anyway, like I said, those were the only stages I outright disliked. In reality, most stages are fine, if not a little forgettable. The one thing I will say is that they fit perfectly into the other levels. If you were to play this game without any knowledge of the GameCube versions, I doubt you could really tell them apart. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is subjective, but I don't have a problem with it. There are only a couple changes left in the main game. First, since SMB1 stages didn't have names, they're given shiny new ones in Deluxe. This is way more helpful, as instead of complaining about Master 3, I can now talk about Stamina Master. And Expert 7, now Expert 6 in Deluxe, is called Exam C. The only time this really gets confusing is when they steal a name from SMB2 and give that one a new name instead. So if I'm talking to someone about Labyrinth, I have to specify whether I mean the actual Labyrinth in Deluxe or Crazy Maze, which is what 2's was renamed to. I mean, it's not the biggest issue by a long shot, but still. The next big change is the removal of the playpoint system. Whereas before you could unlock a bunch of stuff over time, here the system is kind of revamped. All the minigames are available from the start this time, and the cutscenes and credit games from SMB 1 and 2 are unlocked when you first encounter them. Now, a much more significant change is how you unlock more lives. Whereas before you could buy them with playpoints, here you unlock them randomly. Yeah, you heard that right. The game says you have to complete certain objectives, but they're never listed, and as far as everyone can figure out, it's literally random how many lives you get for a challenge or story run, if you get any at all. I get that grinding playpoints could get tedious for experienced players, but I doubt this system is much better when you can unlock 6 lives in one run and 0 lives the next. And yes, that literally happened to me. Glad I played through those 60 levels a second time for nothing. And now we come to the final unlockable of the main game. If you manage to complete a run of Beginner, Advanced, and Expert with or without continues, you unlock Ultimate Mode. If 150 stages was too short for you, how about a marathon of every challenge stage in the game? That's right, Ultimate is a marathon of Beginner, Advanced, and Expert. And if you don't use any continues throughout the 210 standard run, you can play all 300. Clear Beginner without a continue, then you move on to the Beginner Extra stages before playing Advanced. And the same goes for the other 2 difficulties. And yes, beating all of this will add the Master difficulty to the pile with its extra stages if you're still alive by the end. This becomes harder and harder though, as your lives don't reset at any point, and the only way to get more is through banana hunting. Not to mention, even if you start out with 99 lives, you can't have more than 100 at a time, even if you collect enough bananas. 100 may sound like plenty, but good luck getting through 300 stages without at least running low. Now, if you had to do this all in one sitting, that would be especially cruel. But luckily, the team added checkpoints where after each difficulty you can save your progress and return to the game later. It was surprisingly thoughtful of them, and needless to say, it's greatly appreciated, as marathoning this mode will probably take 5 hours or so. And yes, I did end up finishing all 300 stages in Ultimate with no continues, albeit using a technique that could probably be described as save scumming. I may be a madman, but even I have limits. Now then, the last single player mode here is Practice Mode. It's exactly like the first two, just with the full set of stages. But now we come to the mini-games. As I said, most of these are from 2, so I won't be going over any duplicates, but the original 6 did get deluxe treatments, so per usual, let's blast through each one. Monkey Race Deluxe. This mode offers all the modes available from 2, but adds all the courses from 1 for a total of 12. You also have the option between using the items from 1 or 2, although I kinda wonder why they didn't add an option for both. Controls are still not as high as they could be, but overall it's definitely the definitive version. Monkey Fight Deluxe. Like Monkey Race, it's pretty much 2's version with 1's maps, with you being able to choose between either item set. Weirdly enough though, even though you can play 1's maps on survival mode, the stages don't crumble like 2's do. I mean, would it have been that much of a hassle to program that in? Monkey Target Deluxe. Right off the bat, you choose between version 1 and version 2, and this basically means that the maps and items aren't interchangeable. You're either playing the game from SMB 1 or the game from SMB 2. It's fine, but with each version only having 3 maps each, it would have been nice to have the option to play all 6 per game. Monkey Billiards Deluxe. It's exactly the same as 2's, can you notice a pattern? But you can now play with the backgrounds from either version. Monkey Bowling Deluxe. This is pretty much the exact same deal as Billiards. Same options, same characters, pretty much everything is from 2, just with the option to play it with 1's background. Monkey Golf Deluxe. To the surprise of absolutely nobody, it doesn't add anything new, just the option to play the game from either 1 or 2. In fact, the only thing unique about any of these games is that most of the music from 1 is replaced with 2's. Otherwise, there's nothing really deluxe about any of these. Now, of course, Deluxe wouldn't be complete without multiplayer. As always, you can play any of the mini-games with locals, and the main mode brings back the multiplayer challenge option from 2. The only real difference, in fact, is that Ultimate Mode is exclusive to single-player sessions. And while it's a shame the option isn't there at least, I don't think anyone will lose any sleep over it, because really, who wants to play a 300-stage gauntlet with 4 people? Even if you can only play 210 stages, that could literally take all day. What they did offer though is the return of Competition Mode. Don't get your hopes up though, it's literally just copy-pasted from 1. In fact, you can only play the stages from 1, the others just don't show up as an option. And again, I can see why they did this. Even the superior power of the Xbox might have had trouble keeping up that frame rate with 4, even 2 simultaneous instances. Speaking of which, I should probably talk about the presentation and performance, and this is important because how good of an experience you'll have will differ depending on what console you play it on. First off, there are a few changes that persist across all versions. First, in order to compensate for losing the GameCube's notches, movement is cut from 360 directions to just 12. We'll cover that in more detail in a bit. And second, the game's cutscenes are noticeably worse. You see, in Monkey Ball 2, these movies were rendered in real time, whereas Deluxe simply uses pre-rendered video files. And in my opinion at least, they look more washed out and lower quality than before. Definitely a smaller issue, but notable all the same. And thirdly, not only are 1's minigames tracks missing, but so is 1's Space World theme. Rumor has it that these issues were caused by copyright problems, but to that I say, Sega, how do you lose the rights to your own music? Oh, and I think this is a glitch, but the sound effect for the rolling ball seems to be gone too. Now it just makes a weird warbling noise. But now, let's get into some version-specific differences. First, playing the game on an OG Xbox is the best way to experience the game. Although it suffers from a couple problems like the sound effects being noticeably louder than the music, there really aren't many significant other problems. Emulating it on an Xbox 360, however, is a different matter. For one thing, there's instances of slowdown, even to the extent that the timer itself runs at almost half speed on occasion. It particularly seems to have a hard time when the stage has lots of moving parts, or is trying to load something in the background. Even Monkey Fight wasn't safe for me, as the game would outright freeze when playing 2 stages in survival mode. Graphically, the skybox is subject to the occasional glitch as well. I mean, last I checked, the skyline wasn't supposed to look like that. And one last difference is more odd than anything else. Since Deluxe uses pre-rendered cutscenes, the 360 seems to have a hard time running them under emulation. And as a result, a lot of the text is off time, usually not even getting the chance to finish before the cutscene ends. And this applies to both the story and challenge mode cutscenes. And as funny as it is to see Gongon say he wet himself, I can just see someone who's never seen the story before getting very confused. So that brings me to the third and final method of playing Deluxe, which is of course the PS2 version. The thing is, I don't have this part of the game, but I just so happen to know someone who does, so I'll now turn it over to Pixel Pursuit so he can tell you more. Take it away.
Hello, I'm Pixel Pursuit and I love Monkey Ball. I love it so much in fact that I've already reviewed every single one of the main series games over on my channel. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the PS2 version of Super Monkey Ball Deluxe. Now this is probably the single worst way of experiencing the original games, and I would really only recommend that you get this version if you've got literally no alternative. So, let's dive into the reasons as to why that is. The biggest issue with the PS2 port is with the loading times, and while they aren't very long, they are very frequent and completely ruin the flow of the game, making it a much slower paced experience than the other versions are. The area of the game where this becomes a serious issue is with the challenge mode, where upon finishing a level, the game will freeze for a good few seconds, stop the music completely, and have you sit there doing nothing before it finally cuts to the next level. It maybe wouldn't be so bad if the music didn't cut out, but this aspect makes it even more disruptive.
Ready? Go!
Other than that, the story mode also suffers from bad loading times, which is most evident when you're choosing which level you want to play next. Every single time you select a new stage on the level select screen, the game has to load the graphics for the little level displays, and it causes this horrible jittering that just makes the game feel unpolished. The frequent and obtrusive loading isn't the only issue though, far from it. Another disadvantage of this version is that, while the graphics in general still look quite nice and represent the GameCube originals quite accurately, there are some visual effects that are missing, like transparent platforms and reflective textures, and generally the visual quality is lowered to compensate for the PS2 not being quite as powerful as the Xbox or GameCube. If the loading and downgraded graphics don't bother you though, there's one last major detail that might be the nail in the coffin for you, and that is the controls. As Kardino mentioned, the original Super Monkey Ball games are of course known for their incredibly precise controls. Deluxe limits these movements however, which automatically makes this a dramatically inferior version. And while the Xbox version also suffers from this problem, it's still much better than on PS2. The issue really comes down to the fact that you can't make micro adjustments to your movement. If you're going across a narrow path with a turn in front of you, you can't just very slightly move the analog stick away to the side because the game won't pick up on that slight movement and it will continue to move you forward in a straight line. For the most part, if you're a more casual player and you just stick to the easier difficulties in the story mode, this won't really matter, but once you get to the expert stages, you really start noticing that something isn't quite right. Levels that I can get through easily in the original games become incredibly difficult, and it just becomes frustrating because it's almost artificially difficult due to not giving you the control that you need. You have to overcompensate for slight turns, which very often ends up with you completely losing your balance. And not only does this feel awful, but it also makes the game look pretty janky as well. It's absolutely nothing like the smooth movement from the original games. And then on top of all of this, the PS2 version also has a worse frame rate than the Xbox and GameCube versions, with the PS2 running it at 30 frames per second and the Xbox and GameCube running at a smooth 60. I really don't normally mind this sort of thing, but with a precision-based game like this, you need that smooth frame rate to feel like you're fully in control. Of course, another disadvantage with the PS2 version is that in order to have 3 or 4 person multiplayer, you'll need to own a PS2 multitap, because unlike the Xbox and GameCube, there's only 2 controller ports on the console itself, so it's not really as ideal for playing the party games either. At the end of the day though, this is still classic Super Monkey Ball, and while it is the worst way of experiencing the original games, it's not bad to the degree that it's unenjoyable. It's just that I would seriously recommend getting the original 2 GameCube games or the Xbox version of Deluxe over this. Only get this if you've got no alternative. And with that, I'll turn it back to Kardino.
Thanks! I'll leave a link to Pixel Pursuit's channel in the description. His reviews are great and I encourage you to check him out. In the end, I'm not really sure what to think of Deluxe. The whole thing just feels a little rushed, really. Content-wise, it's obviously superior to its GameCube counterparts, and when I'm blasting through dozens of courses non-stop, it's really fun. But the surrounding package, at least in my opinion, is inferior. With the visual problems, the occasional slowdown, the cut movement, and the questionable replacement for the playpoint system, I can't help but feel like Super Monkey Ball 2 is a more polished experience, even if it only has half the content. But anyway, with Sega now at the helm of the Super Monkey Ball series, everyone was waiting to see what they would make next. I mean, they'd already ported the first Monkey Ball to the GBA, and now the PS2 and Xbox, so it was clearly time for something new, right? Well, I guess that's a topic for later. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.